Hi, everyone. Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch Top 20. David, the Louisiana Derby and the Jeff Ruby Stakes were the major three-year-old races last weekend. I'm not sure if the Kentucky Derby winner ran last week, but if he did, it probably was at Fairgrounds. So my question is, did we see a potential Derby winner last weekend?
I think we saw some horses that could potentially be part of the trifecta or superfecta in the Kentucky Derby, horses that seem to handle the distance. We'll see if they're able to actually attain victory on the first Saturday in May. But we're now in the midst of these final round prep races. The changes are going to come at us fast and furious, but felt like they were coming at a bit of a trickle the past week.
Well, now that the Derby points scheme has jumped up to 100 points to the winner, 50 to the runner-up, 25 for third, these Derby prep races take on added significance. And the Louisiana Derby and the Jeff Ruby Stakes both influenced our top 20 for this week. We have two horses that were added to the list. Actually, one of them was re-added. Tistastic, winner of the Louisiana Derby. We talked about him in February. We dropped him after when he ran so poorly down at Oaklawn Park. He bounced back in a big way, and Flying Mohawk, the runner-up finisher in the Jeff Ruby Stakes, two adds to the top 20. David, you opened up Tistastic, or reopened him up at 25 to 1. Flying Mohawk at 50 to 1. 50 to 1 almost seems like an underlay on Flying Mohawk. To talk about the prices that you laid on these two horses.
Yeah, not going to go higher than 50 to 1 at this stage of the game, but he will be a huge long shot in the Kentucky Derby, having never run on the dirt before. As for Tistastic, you mentioned, we had him on the list, pretty low down on the list earlier in the season. We dropped him off after the Rebel when he probably didn't get the best trip. You could make the case he didn't get the best trips in either the Southwest or the Rebel, and it finally worked out for him in the Louisiana Derby, and he feels like a horse that is going to have no trouble handling the mile and a quarter. We'll just see if he can do it fast enough to become a Kentucky Derby winner.
Well, we'll talk about the Louisiana Derby in just a minute. Tistastic got a great trip, a good setup, and a good ride from Rosario to win the Louisiana Derby. He's in the Derby. That will be his next start. In order to make room for Tistastic and Flying Mohawk, we had to drop a couple, and it was kind of a relatively easy decision. Built, I think that the distance limitations that you had hinted at earlier, David, came to fruition. He could not stay the trip of a mile and 3/16.
Yeah, same thing as we saw in the Risen Star. He ranged up at the quarter pole like he was going to be a serious threat in the Louisiana Derby, and he really shortened stride in the final eighth of a mile and actually faded to finish off the board. So I think that confirms he's a horse that probably needs a turn back. And you probably can say the same thing about California Burrito after he disappointed in the Jeff Ruby. Took some awkward strides in the stretch that didn't help, but it felt like he was beaten by that point anyway.
Yeah, he was. I'm not sure how good California Burrito is anyway. He's off the list. So is Built, Louisiana Derby 5th and Jeff Ruby 7th. We need to talk about the horse that we did not add to the list, even though he won the Jeff Ruby, earned 100 points, and can run in the Kentucky Derby if he wants to. But David, Final Gambit has never raced on dirt, and I know that's not necessarily a deal breaker for everybody. It is for me because I just don't see that he is that fast of a horse. So talk about our decision to not include Final Gambit in the Derby in the top 20. And we don't even know where his next start will be anyway.
Yeah, I think we're going to try to handle this horse the same way that we did for Endlessly last year when he had serious concerns coming out of the Jeff Ruby about handling the dirt. He did wind up in the Kentucky Derby. The connections wanted to go. We'll see if the same thing turns out to be true for Final Gambit, but it sounds like they're on the fence right now, so we're going to take the cautious route and not put him on the list just yet until he has a couple workouts on the dirt. That's going to make up Brad Cox's mind about whether or not he winds up in the Derby field, though. I did see a quote from Brad Cox last week after the race where he was saying that there was a reason he started this horse out on the turf and synthetic and not the dirt based on his dirt workouts last year. So we'll see if it's a different story now.
Final Gambit will make his debut on the bubble this week, but he did not crack the top 20. We will monitor his situation. After last week, David, you made a couple of significant odds changes. Specifically, Journalism went from 9 to 2 down to 4 to 1. He's getting closer and closer to being the dominant favorite, pending his performance next week in the Santa Anita Derby. And the other odds revision that I thought was significant was Barnes, who has been ranked among the top choices on the Derby Watch since we started in February. You raised his price from 10 to 1 to 20 to 1. Tell us about your thinking behind that odds hike.
Yeah, I mean, as far as journalism goes, it's just a matter of getting closer to the Derby. We didn't see any knockout performances from the past week, so I made him a slightly stronger favorite. But with Barnes, It feels like the narrative around him is veering into concerning territory because we thought he was going to run in the Arkansas Derby. That's where Bob Baffert typically runs his top horses that are not going to run the Santa Anita Derby, and Barnes needs points. The Arkansas Derby seemed like the perfect opportunity for a horse to get points out of. Bob instead elected to take that route with Cornucopian. Barnes will not be running this weekend. We'll see if he ultimately shows up in one of the final round prep races next weekend. But his last two workouts, for a horse who has gotten some rave reviews for his drills in the morning, especially leading up to the San Felipe, to get outworked by two stablemates the last couple of times, it raises some red flags.
Yeah, he was outworked by Cornucopian on March 17th. And then this last weekend on Sunday morning, he was outworked by Rodriguez. Rodriguez is a horse who couldn't get within hailing distance of Barnes in their previous start, but Rodriguez actually outworked Barnes last Sunday morning. Trainer Bob Baffert said he has his alibi for Barnes' substandard workout was that he took blinkers off, trying to experiment, and Barnes did not like it. I wonder if maybe he just ran a little too fast in his first route race. He entered a 105 Beyer speed figure. That race did not move him forward at all. If anything, it has kind of led to his potential downfall, at least in the mornings. We're accustomed to seeing Barnes work fast, outwork his company, and not to besmirch Cornucopian or Rodriguez, who are good colts, obviously, but Barnes was earlier this season the top 3-year-old, believed to be anyway, one of the top 3-year-olds in the barn. But after his workouts last week, it certainly does not seem like he is hitting spring at the top of his game. So that's reason enough to lift his odds from 10-1 to 21. And as you said, David, we'll see where Baffert runs him next. Maybe, who knows? Maybe he's not even going to point for the Kentucky Derby. I'm not sure about that, but we'll know more next week when he has his final workout. Barnes worked without blinkers last week. That's why Baffert said he did not work so well. We'll see. All right, let's talk about the two major stakes races that were run last weekend, starting out with the Louisiana Derby at Fairgrounds. There were two Derby watchers in the field, those being Chunk of Gold and Built. There were two horses on the bubble, John Hancock and Caldera. David, it's no surprise that John Hancock got beat. We did not like him going in. He finished fourth as the favorite. But I have to admit, I did not see the winner coming. Tistastic is a horse that we talked about weeks ago. He seemed to regress until he got back to Fairgrounds this last week.
Yeah, I probably should have seen the winner coming because this is a horse that I liked prior to the Rebel, and I jumped off his back. And despite the fact that he didn't get the best trip that day, it did seem like two things really worked in Tistastic's favor here. Number one is the distance. He is this tall drink of water that just looks like he's going to run all day. I mean, it looks like he sometimes takes one stride to every horse's two coming through the stretch. So distance is clearly no problem for him. The other thing is the pace of this race completely fell apart. You can see the fractions in the lower portion of the chart, sub 23 for the opening quarter, which is run on a long straightaway. So sometimes you do see fast opening quarters going this distance at Fairgrounds, but they went a sub 47 half. Given the way they came home, and you could just see it in the chart, the pace completely fell apart. Those that were close to the pace were left gasping in the stretch, and Tistastic and Instant Replay, who were last and second to last early, ended up completing the trifecta.
Yeah, the pace scenario definitely benefited the first and third place finishers. They ran well. They took advantage of the situation and ran well to finish first and third. I'm going to just straddle the fence on my take on Tistastic. I can't knock him, but I can't fully endorse him either. He got a great ride from Joel Rosario, who saved as much ground as possible at every stage of the race. As you mentioned, David, the pace fell apart in favor of his closing style. He earned a career best speed figure, and sooner or later, trainer Steve Asmussen, the winningest trainer in thoroughbred history, is going to win the Kentucky Derby. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a horse like Tistastic, who will be his 27th starter, Asmussen's 27th starter in the Kentucky Derby. I know a lot of his starters have been long shots. Tistastic is going to be a little bit of a price. He's not impossible to like in the Kentucky Derby for reasons that you just outlined. He should relish the mile and 1/4. He certainly did a mile and 3/16, but it's not all that easy to work out a trip from the back of the pack with his closing style.
Certainly not. He's a horse that's going to need racing luck in the Derby, but if a few speed horses wind up in there and the pace heats up and it's falling apart at the end, you know he's one that's going to be finishing. So we'll see how that trip does work out on the first Saturday in May.
David, before we talk about the runner-up Chunk of Gold, I want to call everyone's attention to a very interesting tweet that you put out the other day. regarding a July race at Saratoga last summer. There were some pretty good horses in the 7th race on July 27th, weren't there?
Yeah, I guess it's never a big surprise when horses who debut in a Saturday maiden race at Saratoga end up going places, but that Jim Dandy Day maiden race might produce 3 Kentucky Derby starters, as Chancellor McPatrick is squarely in the mix as a contender in a prep race next week. American Promise already has the points. He was and also ran in that race, and Tistastic, he split the field, finishing 5th that day, looking like a horse that would relish added ground, and he certainly did.
Well, when we get to Saratoga this summer, I'm going to be looking for whatever maiden races run on Jim Dandy and, circle the winner as a potential, or circle the entire field as potential Derby candidates for 2026. Let's talk about the runner-up Chunk of Gold, Louisiana Derby runner-up Chunk of Gold. He earned the same figure, a 92, as he did in his previous start in the Risen Star. But David, I thought that Chunk of Gold ran a lot better. He was more forwardly placed. I like it when a horse shows improved early speed. Maybe that compromised his finishing kick a little bit, but I thought he ran better, even though he earned the same figure as his previous start. What's your take on Chunk of Gold?
I'm becoming a pretty big fan of this horse. He's a hard trier. He's an overachiever. He's a $2,500 yearling purchase who has now earned his way into the Kentucky Derby for some little-known connections who have to be thrilled that this horse is taking them to the Kentucky Derby. And yeah, he's finished 2nd in all 3 of his stakes attempts, but he has run better than it looks every single time. The Risen Star, he had traffic at the top of the stretch. And last time the Louisiana Derby, the pace completely fell apart. He was the one horse that was sort of in that first pack of runners within 3 lengths of the lead that was still fighting it out at the end of the race. So I think he deserves credit for making an earlier move than Tistastic and still battling onto the wire. He's going to have to get faster in the Kentucky Derby, but he's another one that's going to be a price in that race that maybe if he gets ridden a little more conservatively could pick up some pieces.
Tistastic and Chunk of Gold, 1-2 in the Louisiana Derby. They'll meet again in the Kentucky Derby. Let's talk briefly about some of the horses that misfire. John Hancock and Bill, we touched on that earlier, probably distance compromised. The horse that was disappointing, but I think he had a legitimate excuse, was 8th place finisher Caldera. He stumbled badly at the break. He got pinched between 2 rivals. He got ranked past the stands the first time. And although he ultimately settled down and appeared to be in a good position, that early trouble, in my opinion, David, completely compromised Caldera's chances. I think he has a valid excuse. The problem with him, at least right now, relative to the Kentucky Derby, he has only 10 qualifying points. It's going to be very tough for Caldera to get into the Kentucky Derby. Do you agree with me or not that Caldera had a legitimate excuse of in the Louisiana Derby?
He had some excuses, but he did ultimately finish way back, and I did want to see him do a little bit more running after that adversity. And we know Dwayne Lucas is never afraid to run back in a race like the Lexington, but even if he does and wins that race, he still might not have enough points to get to the Kentucky Derby. So he's in a tough spot. I will say, John Hancock finished 4th. He actually ran better than even I was expecting because he was setting that fast pace. He got passed by Built in the stretch, got cut off by that rival, came outside him, and actually passed Built at the end to complete the superfecta. He probably won't be in the Kentucky Derby. We'll see what Brad Cox does with him next. But maybe he's a horse you want to keep in mind down the line for a race like the Preakness or beyond.
Well, he's lightly raced. He's got speed. He's a good horse. He's a stakes winner. So maybe we shouldn't be quite so hard on John Hancock. But when you're trying to gauge which of these horses is going to get a 1.25 miles the first Saturday in May, John Hancock certainly not on that list. We should probably also discuss Instant Replay, the 3rd place finisher in the Louisiana Derby. Apparently, he might go next in the Lexington Stakes, and if he were to pop up and win that race, Instant Replay would likely have enough points to make the Kentucky Derby field. Instant Replay rallied from last. He got a great ride from Florent Giroux. He took advantage of the race shape, but he's a horse that's going to lay back and come with the run. He'll need to make one more start between now and the Kentucky Derby to get into the field. Does Instant Replay have any chance at all?
I mean, I guess the Lexington is going to be a popular last chance prep for a lot of these horses. As you were alluding to, I think he was very opportunistic in this Louisiana Derby. He got a fantastic ride, saving ground, rated to last early, coming and just picking up pieces at the end. I'm not quite convinced that he's at the quality for the Kentucky Derby.
I agree, but he will be running late, and who knows? He could possibly hit the board and maybe key a nice trifecta. As far as the Lexington Stakes goes, just a quick side note. Bullard, who we have talked about earlier, he went to the Rebel. He got sick. He missed nearly 2 weeks of training. He's back on the beam right now as far as his training pattern goes at Santa Anita. And Bullard is expected to make his next start in the Lexington Stakes. Trainer Michael McCarthy has no designs on trying to make the Kentucky Derby with Bullard, but the Lexington would be a good comeback spot for a gun runner colt that McCarthy has said all along. He can't wait to stretch him out. So the Lexington, you're right, David, it should come up as a very interesting race. The second stakes race this last weekend of significance was the Jeff Ruby Stakes on synthetic at Turfway Park. And the only Derby Watch listers in the field was California Burrito. Poster was on the bubble. Neither of them ran very well. The winner was a horse coming off a 66 Beyer maiden win. His name was Final Gambit. David, this is one I had a hard time coming up with.
Yeah, he's a horse that you certainly couldn't like based on the speed figures. He had been visually impressive when he broke his maiden with a very similar kind of run, looping the field from way back to when going away, but that was a slow maiden race, and this was a 100-point Derby prep, and somehow he was able to do it again against a much tougher field. I will say he got a great and confident ride from Luan Machado, who took him right to the back of the pack, seemed to know what he had underneath him, and as soon as he peeled this horse out to the widest position at about the 5/16 pole, you could see he was rolling, and once he got into the stretch, he just mowed this field down and was really the only one that was finishing with energy across the wire, as everyone was was getting tired in the final eighth of a mile of this race. So he had no trouble getting the 9 furlongs on the synthetic course. He's a horse that they had debuted on the turf at the start of his career. Dirt feels like it's a major question mark, though, for him as well as the runner-up.
Well, Final Gambit certainly should be finishing if he does, in fact, run in the Kentucky Derby on dirt. We know this about Final Gambit. He's likely to make his next start the first Saturday in May at Churchill Downs. It's going to be in either the American turf or the Kentucky Derby. And if he does show up in the Kentucky Derby, it's going to create a dilemma. How do you handle a synthetic turf horse who is running on dirt? I don't think there is any easy answer. My gut feeling is just to blanketly condemn all of them, but that's not fair. Animal Kingdom won the Kentucky Derby in his very first start on dirt. He had won the race on synthetic. Two Phils ran super a couple years ago in the Kentucky Derby, finishing second, and Rich Strike as well, 4 years ago, popped up and won the Kentucky Derby after competing in the Jeff Ruby. Of course, last year we saw a good example of a horse who did not belong, a Jeff Ruby winner who did not belong in the Kentucky Derby. That was Endlessly, and in my opinion, I think that pretty much compromised his entire 3-year-old campaign, Endlessly. So there's no real easy answer. I'm sure that ultimately, trainer Brad Cox is going to do the right thing. But for now, I got to go against both Flying Gambit and Flying Mohawk. What's your overall kind of general take, David, as far as synthetic horses moving to dirt?
Well, first, I'll comment just on their performances in the Ruby. One point I want to make is we talked about a pace collapse in the Louisiana Derby. You could say the exact same thing about the Jeff Ruby. I know that the pace doesn't look quite as fast as that of the Louisiana Derby, but just look at the PPs here. The horses who were 11th and 12th at the first call were the first two across the wire in reverse order. So it was a race that completely fell apart. So I think you want to be a little skeptical of these performances based on that point. And also switching surfaces, our colleague Nicole Russo, who was doing some digging into past Jeff Ruby winners, made the point to us that the horses that have been successful out of this race in the Kentucky Derby are horses who did have prior dirt form. These two do not, and they both have significant turf pedigrees.
That's a good point. If we're going to talk about how the race shape benefited Final Gambit and Flying Mohawk, we should probably at least mention third place finisher Maximum Promise, who was relatively forwardly placed, held on and finished third, and he apparently is going to run back in the Lexington, another horse going to the Lexington. And if he were to pop up and win that race, Maximum Promise could very well be in the Kentucky Derby as well, trained by Ken McPeak. But you're right about the race flow. It benefited the 1-2 finishers in the Jeff Ruby. It benefited the 1-3 finishers in the Louisiana Derby. And we know the Kentucky Derby most always has a legitimate pace to run at. So they'll get their chance in the Kentucky Derby if that's where they start next. Okay, the Jeff Ruby was won by Final Gambit. Before we talk about the two stakes races coming up this weekend, let's talk about who's on the bubble, who's off the bubble. We dropped 3 from the bubble list, those being Caldera, John Hancock and Poster. We added Cornucopian, Disruptor, and Final Gambit. Cornucopian is favored this weekend in the Arkansas Derby. Disruptor is a contender in the Florida Derby, and Final Gambit with his 100 points to be determined where his next start will be. And then, of course, Baeza, Grande, and Sand Devil. They are all scheduled to run next weekend, April 5th, at Santa Anita, Baeza, Santa Anita Derby, Grande, and Sand Devil in the Wood Memorial. Okay, let's talk about the upcoming races this weekend. Again, we're in the 100 points to the winner phase, and there are two major races this week, the Florida Derby at Gulfstream Park, the Arkansas Derby at Oaklawn Park. There's also the Fukiru Stakes in Japan, and the winner of that race will earn a Kentucky Derby berth. We'll talk about that briefly in just a minute. As far as the Florida Derby, 3 Derby Watch listers in the field: Sovereignty, Matticat Road, and Tappan Street, and a new bubble horse, Disruptor. David, other than Sovereignty, is there a legitimate Kentucky Derby contender in the Florida Derby?
I think there might be. Sovereignty obviously has already proven himself as a horse that seems like he's squarely on the path to get to the first Saturday in May. The other horse that I think I'm expecting to get a big effort out of in this race is Tappan Street, or Tappan Street, I think is the way the connections say it. The number 9 here, he was the runner-up in the Holy Bull, and I've got some questions about the strength of the Holy Bull, but he's been working up a storm coming into this race, and I'm not going to be surprised when this Brad Cox trainee produces a big effort on Saturday.
Well, not only did he run well, but he ran well with what I believe to be a compromising trip. He was wide in the parking lot virtually the entire way around. He only got beat less than 2 lengths. I thought he ran well. He's training super. He's getting better. As far as the Kentucky Derby goes, which would be his 4th career start, that's a tall order, but I don't think he's up that much up against it in the Florida Derby. Tappan Street, or however you want to call it. What about a couple of he's one of the 2 very lightly raced colts in this field. The other one being Disruptor. Disruptor making only his 3rd career start, coming in off a maiden sprint win. He won by more than 9 lengths. Does Disruptor have any chance at all, in your opinion, David, to wire this field?
Yeah, we've got a couple horses like this in both preps this weekend in Disruptor and Cornucopia. And Disruptor obviously has 2 starts under his belt, but he's coming off an impressive maiden victory sprinting. It's a big ask to go from a 1-turn sprint out to this 2-turn 9 furlong distance in a final round Derby prep race. Clearly, Disruptor has some talent. This is not something that Todd Pletcher's done with a whole lot of success in recent years, going right from a maiden race into a Kentucky Derby prep and winning. So Disruptor has to buck that trend, but he's a horse who's trained well into this race. He's trained well into every start. That's why he's been odds on both times so far.
Well, I think that he's going to have a tough time because there seems to be plenty of speed in the Florida Derby. Number 1, Neoquos, Disruptor has speed. So does Matticat Road, even though Matticat Road is taking blinkers off. Bob Baffert trainees generally are in the race early. There's a look at Sovereignty, who's solidified as the 2nd choice on the Derby Watch odds line by David. Sovereignty and Matticat Road coming in from a runner-up finish in the Rebel Stakes. And we still don't know kind of what to make of his Rebel runner-up. On the surface, it looks like 45 and change, 10 and change, and to hold second was a very good performance. The track was different that day at Oaklawn Park, and I think that benefited Matticat Road. But win, lose, or draw, David, Matticat Road is going to influence how the Florida Derby unfolds, correct?
He surely should. He's got that speed that we saw last time in the Rebel. I agree with you with taking the blinkers off and drawing outside of some other speeds. I doubt he's going to be as aggressively ridden as last time, and I think they're going to be cognizant of the fact that this horse does have some stamina questions to answer, so maybe they ride him a little more conservatively here, but you can just see on the workouts coming into this race, the raw speed is there based on that 46-2 drill from March 16th.
Yeah, he's a fast horse, Matticat Road, a fast, good horse. Whether he's a 1.25 mile type horse remains to be seen, but he's headed to Florida for the Florida Derby, and we'll be able to review that race next week on Derby Watch. A couple of lightly raced horses, Disruptor and Tappan Street, light campaigns. They're both making the 3rd starts of their career. I don't have any problem with a lightly raced colt jumping up and trying a Derby prep race, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about the Arkansas Derby. Getting to the Kentucky Derby and winning the Derby in a 4th career start. It's been done more often recently. In fact, Mage did it in 2023 and Justify did it in 2018, won the Kentucky Derby in the 4th starts of their career. It's takes a very special horse to do that. Justify certainly was special, and Mage certainly was good a couple years ago, but it's a tough way to go. Sovereignty, he's the horse to beat in the Florida Derby. David, I don't think that Sovereignty has to win the Florida Derby to still like him in the Kentucky Derby. And I also am a little uncomfortable with the situation with regards to Sovereignty. His jockey, Junior Alvarado, was injured. He'll be replaced in the Florida Derby by Manny Franco. That kind of disruption behind the scenes is never a good sign, but I expect Sovereignty to run well in the Florida Derby. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think Sovereignty is moving in the right direction. I think there was a lot of expectation even before the Fountain of Youth was run that he was a horse that was going to move forward for that performance, and he won the race in a mild surprise. So we might still see that forward movement. He certainly worked like that could be the case, but he is a horse that comes from towards the back of the pack. As you said, he's got a new jockey on for this race in Manny Franco, who is a fine jockey and wins a lot of races in New York, and a strong rider who certainly can finish on a horse, and Sovereignty should benefit from that encouragement. But it still is a new situation for a horse that's going to be a pretty short price. So I did a preview of this race with Mike Beer earlier today. You'll find that on the Racing Form YouTube channel. I did take a shot against Sovereignty with Japan Street, but feels like a horse that, even if he wins on Saturday, as you said, not exactly a horse I'm going to be running to like in the Kentucky Derby.
Absolutely. Okay, Sovereignty, the horse to beat in the Florida Derby. The Arkansas Derby will be run Saturday at Oaklawn Park. Two Derby Watch listers in the lineup, Sandman and Cole Battle, a former Derby Watcher, Speed King, and a new bubble horse, Cornucopian. David, is Cornucopian the type of horse you'd want to bet in a grade 1 route race after a debut sprint win, considering that he is listed at 7-5 in the Arkansas Derby?
I would say no in just about every other situation, except for the fact that this horse is trained by Bob Baffert. And I feel like we've seen this show before where Bob Baffert has a highly talented horse that he's kind of rushing into a race and finds the right prep for him. Bob has a knack for doing this. And he certainly found a prep race that looks like it could be winnable for this kind of horse, just given the speed figure advantage that Cornucopian appears to possess over this field. Price, though, always has to be your guide, Brad, and I'm not willing to take a price below 2-1 on this horse, and I think he is going to get bet that way, but I am certainly not going to be surprised when he's successful on this Saturday. If he's successful in a Saturday 5 weeks from now, that's a completely different story.
Well, I think Cornucopian wires the field, but like you, David, I'm not interested in backing Cornucopian at odds of 7-5. I also don't really want to bet against him because he's such a standout on speed figures. He may also have a pace advantage, and from the outside, they're just going to let him roll. And I think he goes wire to wire, Cornucopian does. But again, it's not a horse that I'm going to be betting on. There are some other good horses in this field, including Sandman, who ran against the grain of the racetrack last time out, finished a decent third in the Rebel Stakes. David, Sandman is listed at 3-1, second choice on the morning line. I think he has a chance in the Arkansas Derby. What about you?
He certainly has a chance. I think he's probably the most likely of anybody in this field to at least hit the board because he's been consistent. You know the distance is not going to be a problem for him, and he typically comes running at the ends of his races. He's just left himself a little bit too much to do in his two prior Derby preps this year, the Southwest and the Rebel. And Brad, when I go through this field, I don't see a ton of pace in here. Cornucopian drawing the outside. I think they're going to have some options about how aggressive they want to be because Speed King is two Cornucopians inside. And we know that Speed King kind of showed last time in the Rebel that he reacted badly to rating tactics. So they've got to be aggressive with him and go back to riding him as a front runner. So maybe Cornucopian is going to be content with John Velasquez aboard to just sit right off Speed King and see if he's successful running that way. And maybe this pace doesn't heat up that much. And that could potentially be a problem for Sandman, maybe less of a problem for Cole Battle, the other kind of protagonist we should talk about in the Arkansas Derby.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Cole Battle because what has he done wrong? Absolutely nothing. He's won 4 consecutive stakes races, a decisive victory in the Rebel Stakes last time out, and reportedly, he's training up a storm since then. Cole Battle, an interesting come-from-behind candidate. I still think Cornucopian is going to win this race, but Cole Battle, you got to love a horse like him from the low-profile connections with a 5-for-7 career record. He'll be finishing, and then it's on to Kentucky. All right, we talked a little bit earlier about lightly raced horses going into these Derby preps and then into the Kentucky Derby. And just for a point of conversation, we're going to show two examples of horses who went from maiden wins into graded stakes victories in Derby prep races in recent years. And if we could put that up with Curlin and Deby. Curlin broke his maiden first time out at Gulfstream Park. In his next start, he won the Rebel in a landslide, followed with the Arkansas Derby blowout, and then third in the Kentucky Derby. Deby, 3 years ago, won his career debut in a sprint, won the Santa Anita Derby second time out, and then misfired in the Kentucky Derby. I guess the point is, David, you can win a Derby prep race with a light campaign or less seasoning, but the Kentucky Derby itself is a completely different animal. I think it requires seasoning. You don't get too many mages and justifies winning the Derby in the fourth starts of their careers. I believe that even if Cornucopian wins the Arkansas Derby, as I expect he will, he'll be in tough in the Kentucky Derby unless he's just simply the fastest horse in the field. What's your take on these lightly raced horses going into these Derby preps?
Yeah, everyone points to Justify as the success story, but Justify has been the exception to the rule here. And you pulled up two examples. It's very tough to do to get a horse enough seasoning to win the Kentucky Derby off just 2 or 3 starts. And while there's been a little bit of recent success, I still think it needs to be a special kind of horse. And for a horse like Cornucopian, who was forwardly placed on debut, expected to be forwardly placed on Saturday, might never see another horse before the Kentucky Derby in any of his races. I worry that a horse like that will not have the seasoning. So I'm not betting him this Saturday. I'm definitely not betting him the first Saturday in May. And maybe it's not such a bad thing for somebody who wants to bet the Kentucky Derby if he's an impressive winner in Arkansas, because that might inflate the price on some others that you do like more.
There is nothing wrong with passing a race if the price is not right. And I don't think the price is right on Cornucopian. Yes, he should win, but his price is going to be way too short. Okay, that's the Arkansas Derby. Sandman and Cold Battle up against the California Shipper, Cornucopian. The final Derby prep race that will be run this weekend is the Fukiru Stakes in Japan. That race will not be drawn until Thursday. David, there's a horse that we expect to be in the entries, Luxor Cafe, who's been on quite the roll over in Japan. What are you looking to see from Luxor Cafe in the Fukiru?
Yeah, this horse has won 3 in a row coming in here, including the Hyacinth, the prior race on this Japan road to the Derby. So he already has the most points. We'll see if he can solidify that status, winning the Fukiru Stakes, which is worth more points than the Hyacinth. He is a full brother to a horse named Cafe Faro, who had a lot of success in Group 1 company in Japan, winning races on both dirt and turf. That horse had a reputation for being more of a true miler, and Luxor Cafe did win going 9 furlongs against weaker competition earlier this year. We'll see if he could do it against slightly tougher this weekend in Japan. But if he does, I think we've seen over the past few years, Brad, these Japanese horses seem to get stronger and stronger with each passing season. And even Tio Password, who I think a lot of people just completely dismissed going into the Kentucky Derby last year, ran a much better race than most were expecting.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The Japan breeding industry is world class, and they're sending good horses to big races around the globe. So hopefully Luxor Cafe runs well this weekend in the Fukiru, and hopefully he makes the trip to Kentucky in May. All right, that's a wrap for this week. The main 3-year-old story this last week was Tistastic emerging onto the scene, hoping to give trainer Steve Asmussen his first Kentucky Derby win in the 20s with the 27th Kentucky Derby starter. Barnes continues to lose support out in California. This week, it's the Florida Derby and Arkansas Derby with Sovereignty and Cornucopian. We'll talk about those races next week, and also look forward to the biggest Saturday of spring. That's April 5th, the Santa Anita Derby, Bluegrass, and Wood Memorial. So for David Aragona, I'm Brad Free. We'll see you next week.